Kila siku ya wiki miezi nenda rudi, vile sisi naishi imekuwa desturi. Nimeshindwa kuhimili maisha haya duni, hakuna namna ingine, mimi sina budi.
Yeah, so it's a good number that we have been able to send most of us. I know this is a highly anticipated event, and particularly because it's very rare for us to have a book from the government, and that's why even us as a compost label.
I'm now into the book and the story ends, and then I tell myself this is a gift he's giving me. So even if it's permanent, that's what I'll take. It's a gift that I didn't know, because he's revealing himself. A man revealing his relationship with his father. We don't do that. We put these huge nonsensical tributes in the newspapers. You never talked to your father for 50 years, and then he dies, and then you put husband to so many wives, grandfather to so many children, a church elder. But when somebody asks you, exactly, did you know your father's nickname? Say, no. No. Did you know that your father was the first man to seduce a high school teacher in the village? No, where will you join your wife? Did you know that your father, for all the years you knew him, he had a credit book at the local shop? That's why you guys were eating bread and margarine every day. He had a credit book. Hey, listen, we don't know people. Do you remember the Deputy Chief Justice? She said a very wonderful phrase, you should know people. And then Kenyans turned it around. So everybody in this town, I see people saying, you know the days of Kariuki God. Then I ask them, do you know where he lives today? Say, unajua wazee wa siku hizo. Sijui wako wapi. Kariuki is in South Korea. Enda umtafute mtumilie white car. So we have to proactively, as we leave this room, to create archives of our teachers, that's what Mzungus do. Our pastors. When you meet Zarina in a supermarket, and she's speaking Shoshombas, she's speaking Managu, you would have no idea that Zarina has stood in front of policemen and said, why do you want to change this place? Because when I tell people that was Zarina Pastel, she said, she's so small. I say, yes, but with very big ideas. So, ladies and gentlemen, this book is a serious provocation that the small histories of our teachers, our nurses, the doctors who toil in the village. By the way, most of you go back and ask your grandparents. The local doctor who toiled around was a Muhindi. Na alikuwa na shindano moja, ukiwa na malaria ni hiyo, ukiwa na diarrhea ni hiyo, ukiwa na gonorrhea ni hiyo. Na ni hiyo shindano kubwa, ilikuwa kubwa kama ile ya kutunga ng'ombe, kubwa unakuwa mzima. These people have been forgotten. And so to challenge the system, as Sua is talking about, the system will ask you, where are the records? They always ask that. They always ask that. Even at the university, they tell me at the university, you talk too much, you will never be promoted. I say, you know, my students have seriously promoted me. I have students who are full professors and not in this country that I taught. They are full professors, not in this country. So if I write one of them, I say, I want the following books. They say, yes, are there extra ones that you want to have? I say, no, just send those ones. That's a promotion. So when you ask me for my records as an able scholar, I say, my students are the following. The chief digital editor at Nation, Churchill Otieno, is my student. The chief editor business, Mohammed at Standard, is my student. You want me to continue saying no? The way we challenge this system, and systems are very difficult to undo, is to do this kind of work. Because believe you me, now this online will be a key reference text on Mudoni Nyanjiro. And this is a celebration of archive creation and archive dissemination. Black people, because, and I'm saying black people because Arena is a black person, you understand? If you don't create archives of yourself, your point of reference is still in Europe, is still in America. And by the way, the last word for you. If you wanted to do a proper history of Kenya today, you must go to the British Museum in London. You must. Any review of the book will say, why didn't you go to the British Museum? Because these files are there. The files of who we were in the entire colonial period. They are domiciled at the British Museum in London. In Europe, London is the second most expensive city. Secondly, to get a visa to go to London is a problem. So if we don't start creating our own archives because we will want to go to London, shauri yenu. Asante.
Two panelists, we appreciate your insights, we appreciate your time, but also the coming to discuss about this book before we invite the other himself. But now, as they leave the stage, it's now sessions complicated. We call him Wadiomo, because Wadiomo is a common poem. So Karibu, Gilbert is doing a lot of poetry and a lot of songs. Thank you so much for this.
Let us remember to remember. Let us remember. May we remember not to forget. Let us remember those dismembered. Let us remember to remember. Let us remember the great Queen Mekatilili Menza, Queen from Giriama land. She who was stolen by the colonial terrorists and taken all the way from Giriama land to Gusii land. Mekatilili Menza, she broke out of prison and walked more than 1,000 kilometers back to Giriama land to continue with the liberation of our people. Let us remember not to forget. Ni shujaa Kenya we, ni shujaa nyinyi wote. Let us remember to remember. Let us remember 1922, Mama yetu Muthoni Nyanjiro along the Muthoni Nyanjiro Road. She who defied the colonial terrorists and confronted them after the jailing of the people's leaders. And when the colonial terrorists saw this, they shot her in the heart. And her blood flowed down to the ground, mixing with the soil of our land, germinating the seed of our national struggle, the Kenya Land and Freedom Army, the Mau Mau. Let us remember to remember. Ni shujaa Nyanjiro wetu, ni shujaa Muthoni Nyanjiro, ni shujaa Muthoni we, ni shujaa mzalendo wetu. Let us remember the great dead and Kimathi Washuri, him Field Marshal. Him who said it is better to die on our feet than to live on our knees. May we remember to remember. Let us remember not to forget. Let us remember Pio Gama Pinto, remember not to forget. Remember JM Karaoke, let us remember not to forget. Let us remember the people's leaders. Let us remember Elijah Masinde, remember not to forget. Let us remember, may we remember to remember. Remember Mwangi Mbaja, remember not to forget. Remember Jelagat Mutai, remember not to forget. Let us remember, may we remember to remember not to forget, not to forget, not to forget, not to forget. Asante. I learned about Muthoni Nyanjiro, I think the first time from Professor Maina Kenyatta, because he's one of the earliest writers who talked about Muthoni, also Ngugi wa Thiong'o. And those times we were at the Freedom Corner, so we would discuss and get to know new names. At the Freedom Corner, our biggest job as the youth was to sing and to do poetry. Hiyo ndio ilikuwa struggle yetu. Sengine mawe kidogo. In defense of the mothers of political prisoners. And so we interacted a lot with the scholars, intellectuals who talked about the unspoken heroes and sheroes of this country. And the time I read about this story and heard about it, I was like, how come I'm hearing about this now? That is 90, 91, 92 there. How come in school you were just taught about blood in his body, fire, fire. So there's a scheme, I think, not only in this country, but in this continent, maybe a bit of South America, of brainwashing us and making sure that we don't understand where we come from, so that we don't get the energy to fight those who are in power. Asanteni sana.
I want to invite John. John, I don't know him, but John, he has short poetry, but also Ireche.
Hi. My name is John Mwangi, like the author, Mwangi. So I'm doing, so I'm a poet, spoken word artist. I write. Yes. So the piece I'm going to do is called Be Nobody's Darling, just like the book. It's written by Alice Walker. Yes. So I hope you enjoy and you learn. So even me, I think I've just learned about Muthoni Nyanjiro today. Yes, it has been an interesting session. Yes, I'm glad that he invited me today. So I'll go a little bit slower. Sometimes spoken word artists tend to move so fast that people miss out the intention of the piece. Be nobody's darling. Be an outcast. Take the contradictions of your life and wrap around you like a shawl. To parry storms, to keep you warm. Watch the people succumb to madness with ample cheer. Let them look askance at you when you askance reply. Be an outcast. Be pleased to walk alone and cool. To line the crowded riverbeds with other impetuous fools. Make a merry gathering on the bank where thousands perished for brave hearts' words, they say. But be nobody's darling. Be an outcast. Qualified to live among the dead. Thank you.
This poem is in Gilbert, is it? And of course, we all encourage all languages will be translated, I think, later. Is that here? Is he with us? Aha. Karibu Gilesha. Aha. Is it Gishani? Yeah, what?
The poem is, the art form is called Gishani.
Oh, Gishadi. Yeah, I know Gishadi. So you know I come from that generation as well. Karibu. Yes. Karibu. There's a mic there. Karibu and yeah, Gishani is it's called, and he called it the emergence of suppressed words. Somebody came and street and so for Gishani. It's got its own history, its own culture.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening. My name Amadu Kena Kikuyu. Hii nitaipresent na Kikuyu. Yes. Kitu iko chini, ni kitu iko tani kabisa kuipata kwa Kikuyu, na ilikuwa inatumika kupasa message sana wakati wa vita za Mau, ilikuwa inatumika sana kupasa hiyo message. Ilikuwa unaongea ukiwa Kikuyu watu wawili, lakini mzungu hawezi sikia, ama wale walikuwa wanapea mzungu vile unaongea hawezi sikia. Ilikuwa inatumika wakati huo, na ni kitu imetoka zamani sana. Na vile kuna mzee alikuwa hapa, alikuwa anaongea kuhusu mambo ya our archives. Hii kitu kitaka kujua hii iko mzungu ndiye alichukua, ile ilikuwa ya kwanza zamani sana, iko Italy, kwa museum za Italy, iko huko ile ya kitambo sana kabisa, ile ilikuwa ya kwanza. Na sasa unaona, ukitaka kuifuata itakubidi uende Italy, huko ndiko mambo yake yote imeandikwa ili ujue. But kuna watu walikuwa nayo, na wenyewe walifanya kazi ngumu sana na kazi kubwa sana ya kusambaza hii yani ni kama ilikuwa aina ya nyimbo. Hata kama ilienda, kuna wale walibaki nazo. Na ndio sasa nimeitoa, hii nilitoa kwa mzee Sahi ako na miaka 92. Hapo ndipo nilienda nikamtafuta, nilikuta akiwa na hiki kitu alikuwa anaiba nayo, nikataka kujua ni nini. Na ni kitu kama ya ukoo. Ndio kuachaniwa. Ya kuachaniwa. Na wale watu walikuwa wanatumia hii. Walikuwa watu wanatopika sana kwa Kikuyu, za Wakikuyu. Juu ndio walikuwa wanapewa wakati wa kesi juu ya maarifa zile walikuwa nayo mingi, ili kutumia hii kitu na kuitengeneza itoe ati inatoa message watu waisikize. Ilikuwa unakaa kama miaka kama 3 kutengeneza hii kitu. Inaitwa Gishani. Wazungu walikuja wakaisema, wakaita rato. Lakini rato kwa sijui ni nini rato, lakini ile ilikuwa Gishani. Kuna rato. I don't know. But Gishani kuna mambo mingi iko nayo ya kupeana message. Ikuchoro imechoro, alafu unaweka hizi cells na ziko na maana, kila cell iko na maana. Kwa hii kuna ile inasema, kuna kitu inasimamia, kila kitu iko hapa, kuna kitu inaongea. Dia muda acha tusikize vile ilikuwa naenda, na nitaimba na Kikuyu. Sawa. Mwana nĩageithagia Ngai, akorwo ndageithagia Ngai. Ĩnyite njĩra ya thama-ĩ, ĩrĩa yatemirwo nĩgwa, amũriuma mũgeni wayo. Ĩnĩ karurumĩkanete-ĩ, gaciana igĩtũmworũ-ĩ, ĩna mĩthaitha gĩtũmĩra yakwa. Ĩtambũrũkia rogi wake managuyo-ĩ, wenda kũrĩa nyama cia ng'ondu-ĩrĩe, amu mwana ndarĩ mũthime-ĩ. Ĩgĩcere mũkũi-mũi-ĩ, nũũ watũrire wagĩgĩcathĩ gĩkĩ. Ĩndĩ thoguo kana nĩ nyũkwa-ĩ, ĩkana nĩ bebe wa itũũra. Ĩmũthenya ndethigire ĩrũrũ-ĩ, ĩnjakomagĩra ĩkindũ, ngakomagĩra kamũrũthi ka irĩndũ, ĩkaukoma gatua kangĩ. Ĩmũtumia nĩndatete-ĩ, ũcio ngĩtigĩra ĩrika, ona ciana nĩndatete, icio nacio ngĩtigĩra ĩrũga. Arigiririe noguo, arigiririe noguo. Ĩmũthoni wa Nyangirũ-ĩ, njamba ĩhinya-ĩ, ĩnĩwe watemaga rũngĩ, ĩgaikaire thĩ nĩguo rũria, ĩkĩnyata wagatundu ĩngĩre. Ĩmũthenya ndethigire ĩrũrũ-ĩ, ĩrwagĩta nĩtaworithia, icio ndiganĩria ĩnoguo. Ĩkũgamba mburu ndĩthiĩre-ĩ, ĩkũrĩa twaragĩra ĩgothi, ngakoreka etiĩ cũcũ, ĩndĩ hĩndĩ mambĩrĩria nyũngũ, ĩna nĩnyambĩrĩria ĩhakwa, ĩkumagara thiĩ thome, ĩngakore kĩgotho ĩbaba-ĩ, nĩ hĩndĩ araimagaria thĩna, ĩna nĩnyumagaria ĩhakwa, ĩngakore tũĩ twitũ-ĩ, nĩ hĩndĩ twarĩrire nyũga, ĩrĩa mbirũ na ya ndoguĩ, icio ndiganĩria ĩnoguo. Ĩtondũ tũiguithania ĩna-inĩ, kamũgero kau ndikwenda, ĩnũkwaregereria ĩbaba, araigua kwerũra mwarunyoi, na mũregero ta wa mbembe, ĩna gũciara ta gĩkiai, ĩkũrĩa twaragĩra ĩgothi, ĩndĩ gĩkĩahuragia icũgai, ĩgĩgatwaragĩra ndokia, na gũtwaragĩte twara. Gĩcere mũkũi-mũi-ĩ, ĩgĩakwa ndarutirwo ĩmĩagoi, na mĩratina ya njohi, ĩndĩ guo ndarua kĩũhĩga-ĩ, arigiririe noguo. Ĩkĩani mwarutirwo ĩmĩakai, na mĩratina ya nyondo, ĩndĩ guo mwaria mũgĩkĩga-ĩ, arigiririe noguo. Mwana nĩ wakwa kĩhumo ĩnaniĩ, ngakenera ngurũ Ngai yathĩ, ĩkuga nĩngũragĩra mũndũ, ĩgũcukoragĩrwo ayoniĩ, ĩhau twatemanio ũmũthĩ, ĩnoho tũgatemania rũciũ, ĩciarwo mathĩgĩri kwenda-ĩ, arigiririe noguo-ĩ, mwana nĩageithagio ĩkeirie-ĩ, akorwo atageithagio thiirwo, ndĩmũcokie gatakiĩ gake, ĩkarĩa karagĩrwo ĩmwendia, arigiririe noguo.
But for now it is enough. And you come and say please. Yes, please, Karibu. Mino is from the Justice Centers as well. Yes, so Justice Centers, but also she is into theatre and into poetry, but also we part of the committee for organizing these events. So
Revolutionary greetings, everyone. My name is Minocha from Mukuru Community Justice Center. I also lead a great team by the name Social Justice Centers Traveling Theatre. Ndugu zanguni, it started in the brotherly Swahili greetings. his hands held feebly in front of his chest. I beseech you to listen to this. Once again, the room fell silence. Duku will be taken to court tomorrow, Kamau went on. Muthoni shifted her hands left and right, her eyes strained on Kamau's face. I pray to you to wait for the decision of the court, for we all know he has committed no crime. Indeed. Before he could finish, Muthoni was on her feet, her lips trembling with disgust. Court, you say, tell me, did all these men gather here to hear you talk about your cause? She shouted, her eyes now turned into slits. Before Kamau could gain composure and answer her, she shouted another question at him. Who runs those courts? Tell me. Muthoni thundered on. I still believe that Duku has committed no crime, Kamau said, almost inaudibly. So, you have become his judge now. Muthoni's hands were now on her waist, trembling with rage. After facing Kamau for what seemed like an eternity, Muthoni now addressed the crowd. My brothers and sisters in this struggle, she started her voice now, more composed. Anyone who expects the court to free our leader, Harituku, is like the foolish hyena that slowly follows a man expecting his swinging hands to fall for it to eat. Thank you.
Great.
Asua, Wanjiro, and Prof, thank you so much. You've kind of triggered something in me because my daddy was Dorofo. You know the way they say, and then they say it in such a way, like it sounds like something you should be ashamed of yourself. And I think my daddy was also kind of ashamed because every time his worst insult was "Dear Dorofo Endo," you know, go away, you Dorobo. So, Asua, I'll come. Do you have anything on Dorobo? Because I think I kind of want to know a little bit. I've never wanted to find out about them until.
Mwangi has Dorobo roots, so you too can.
Nice. Yeah, and when the professor talked about genocide, and no, was it you? Yeah, it was you, and the prof talked about the sub-tribes, and I'm thinking, okay. The gallant woman surged forward, her simple calico dress hipped around her thighs, her bosom, sharp and pointed, heaved up and down like she was winnowing. Ooh. The light brown shuka that she wore above her dress billowed in the morning white wind, like her own flag competing with the Union Jack floating above. Some young men tried to hold her, but like a wounded buffalo, she tore on through them. She held onto her ground firmly like a territory she was ready to give up her life for. Nothing could stop her. Our leader, she thundered. Her voice was tremulous, yet firm. Now her breasts heaved up and down in ancient cadence of 1,000 women before her. Is in there, she pointed. She said, pointing to where their leader was held, expecting the men to take up the cue and charge at the askaris and release them. Then ran away with him to the freedom of the days to come. She was now trembling with indignation, the necklaces around her neck flying around like anarchy. She was possessed and nothing could stop her. The police edged closer to her, but all the while, she charged forward.
Yeah, thank you so much, Iko, and such brilliant reading. Thank you so much. Now, I think now the other is inspired.
Well, mine is first of all to thank Mr. Mwangi for calling me. He invited me, he read me, and I only then realized that he was from my home. And I was telling him that maybe when he was a small kid, I contested parliament in Kagema, 1974. So when we talk about generational gaps, we are talking about current. When I say, like the young lady who talked to her, we ask her, what is it that the young people are doing? Maybe what I can just say briefly is, the young generation has a challenge in this country. One has written about Nyajiro. Someone has to write about Guama Kenya, whatever side she was in. Someone has to write about General Mariama. Someone has to write about General Carl, like he has mentioned. And it is you, young generation, who have that challenge. And don't feel that you are so young. I will tell you, I was a dean at the Faculty of Commerce at the age of 31. I was a head of department. I had written 2 books by then. And at the age of 36, I was in a community detention camp. Having been detained because of Mwakenya. I don't know whether any of you knows what is Mwakenya. I don't know whether you know what is Nyayo House. The other day, on 18th of February, we are going to open Nyayo House. We were being taken there naked, in cold water or in hot water, and beaten and stuff. So that history, before it goes very far, let some young people pick it up. Sometimes some of us get tired. I have written a book on Nyayo House, torture chambers, but I don't like reading it again because it is painful. But Mwangi has said he has historialized the history. He has a, what do I call it? Not historialized. He has that's the history. You don't need to have all the facts of the history. But also, I can remember somehow when we read about Paul Fuliele, the diary of the oppressed. And I think it has a book that has its own opening, and it gives us what we are talking about, an education system that denies us our history. But who is to blame? That's the question. Is it we who study the education? Is it our parents?
And I'm here to confirm that Mary Muthoni Nyanjiro is a historical figure. How do I know? My late father was a reverend in the Anglican Church. When my brother was with my family, told us the story that when Mary Nyanjiro was shot in March 1922, and because Mary Nyanjiro was his auntie, the only cow she owned, this is a woman who owned a cow. Women did not own cows. That tells you something. The only cow that she owned was taken across the valley. Nyanjiro's home is in a place called Vidaga. It is very hilly. So the cow went down the hill, went up the hill, and it was left to my late father. So I'm a first-hand witness that Nyanjiro indeed lived, that we know something about her, and this may be a beginning if we want to write her biography, right? Now, not many people notice that Nyanjiro was called Mary, and I have a theory why she was called Mary. Her home was next to the oldest, one of the oldest missionary churches with Zara, established in 1902. Again, here is a woman who took advantage of some sort of liaison with the church. And most probably, Nyanjiro was literate. So Mary, that name is significant because we also know that our nationalists knew the advantage of literacy, and they became the double-edged sword that was to drive the white man out. So you talk about vision. Here was one woman, 1922, baptized. And people ask, why did Nyanjiro come to Nairobi in 1922? And women like her. Some women thought they were prostitutes, actually. And my father used to say that people thought such women were prostitutes. But my take would be slightly different. That people like Nyanjiro were women who had broken out the traditional mold. Very brave, very visionary. And she was willing to take her fate into her own hands. So she came to Nairobi. I don't know how she came to Nairobi, because she couldn't have come in 1922. She must have come before that. So what was she doing in Nairobi? We do not know. Was she an ayah? We do not know. There are stories that her homestead was one of the cleanest homestead in Majengo. That says something about our Nyanjiro. Just to end this, because I don't want to take time, I want to note that women like Nyanjiro, and Nyanjiro specifically, did not set out to be heroines, right? She did not, she would not have called herself an activist, right? But she's a woman who knew when an injustice had been committed, and hers was a gut reaction that she had to do something about it. How many times have we seen things go wrong and we step back because we do not want to be involved? We begin to think about the consequences. We begin to think whether there is a reward in there for us. So it's also about legacy, I think, because 100 years later she would be very shocked to know that we are sitting here celebrating her because that was the last thing on her mind. Finally, every time I walk across the bridge that joins the police station to the city, I always think this bridge should be called the Freedom Walk. Not just for Nyanjiro, but for the women like her. Thank you.
Habari wenzangu. When Juki first invited me to launch Nobody's Darling, I was really excited and intrigued. I was excited because way back in 1992, I had encountered Muthoni Nyanjiro, or Mary Nyanjiro, as we called her more then. As I was writing my first book, which was Challenge to Colonialism. And then in my third book, which was on Manilal Desai, it's called The Stormy Petrel. I have there is actually a whole chapter on Harry Thuku. And then later, some years later, I came across this huge painting of Mary Nyanjiro being shot. It's a huge oil painting, and it was in the storeroom of the National Museums of Kenya. And we actually printed a picture of it in our magazine, Awaz, of 2018, issue number 1. So I had some experience of Nyanjiro, and that's why the excitement. I was intrigued because there is so little known about her. I mean, it was wonderful just hearing the last speaker and getting those details. I mean, we don't know anything about her birth date, we don't know what she looked like, we don't know her age, when she died. We don't know whether she was how urbanized, or she wore traditional clothes, or we don't know anything, quite honestly, or very little. So I was really intrigued that a book had been written on her. But as the speaker said, to the previous speaker mentioned, there is absolutely no doubt about her existence and her bravery, because it is recorded in the archives. And now we have additional information. Even Harry Thuku himself didn't know anything about her, or I've never met her. And we'll talk a little more about that later. Maybe if she had been a man, there might have been some documentation. So now clearly the author, Gilbert, Mwangi, faced the same dilemma. So he did the next best thing. He has written a fictionalized account of Nyanjiro. What he has done is, he has contextualized her life as that of a girl child growing up in the Agikuyu community. So she was born with a clenched fist. She had superhuman powers. She was very fearless, she was daring, she spoke English fluently at a very young age, etc., etc. And now, because she was an extraordinary young person, a young woman, I guess, she was getting, in the community, she was getting ostracized, and she was getting branded as a witch. I think that is not really very surprising because it still goes on today, doesn't it? So there's a lot in the book about the traditional Kikuyu proverbs, songs, myths, sayings and stories, which give us a rudimentary understanding of the Agikuyu people and their culture. To avoid being killed, Nyandiru then runs away from home. She meets up with some of the white missionaries. She goes to school, she gets converted, and begins to encounter the injustices of colonialism. Among these are the hut tax, the forced labor, the ban on female circumcision, the demeaning of Kikuyu culture and traditions, and so on. Next, we see her taking up leadership and urging her people to resist and refuse to comply. And thus, she comes to the notice of the British officials. Meanwhile, one of the community leaders, Harry Zuku, is arrested, and he is being held in this very central police station of the road here. Some things don't change, do they? So Harry Zuku, from his cell on the second floor of the police station, sees the large crowd that is gathered, most of them sitting very peacefully on the ground. There are actual photos which show us that. And the ground is the one on which the University of Nairobi now stands, on that open ground, marshy as somebody mentioned. And then he sees, for the first time, he sees Nyanjiru urging the crowd to move forward and to surround the police station. The crowd is hesitating, not surprisingly, because they're facing a whole lot of KAR policemen with rifles at the ready. And of course there are white constables and officers, fully armed also, standing on the balcony of the Norfolk Hotel. And that is when she utters her famous challenge: "You are cowards, take my skirt and give me your trousers." And then she is shot and killed. Official records put the figure at 23 killed and 28 wounded that day.
Thank you so much. That's all. That's all. Thank you so much, guys. And then there is a song, of course. Yes, there is a song, of course. Yes, yes. No, you want to come here? There is a celebration.
You can put it online.
Oh, you can put it live, yeah. Okay, fine. There is a song, of course, that Wanjiru has always been talking about it. We talked about it. We put them chance to look at that song. The book is available for purchase. It's 800 shillings here. We have a table outside where we have